Number 1. I used to be a corrections officer. At my jail, we had a non-violent criminal in lockdown. He'd been put with a violent one. The bad dude killed the other guy with a coloring pencil, put it straight through his eyeball. I was working the female facility, so I only heard all of the chatter over the radio. Speaking of eyeballs, we also had a guy pull his own one out. The worst thing I dealt with, though, were the stories when I was talking to my girls. There was this one girl that none of the other COs could stand. Let's call her Jess. She was constantly in trouble and getting put into lockdown. I had a very good rapport with her, though, and occasionally she'd open up to me. I came in one day, and Jess was in a cell acting out. It turns out that her aunt, who was in the same facility, had just been sentenced to death. This woman, Margaret Allen, in case anyone's interested in looking this up, had killed a woman by cutting her throat and pouring bleach into it, as well as into her mouth. Then she buried her alive. Anyway, Jess was upset by this, and even I was like, look, that fucking bitch deserves death. You need to behave and not get into any more trouble or lose sleep over this. So she proceeded to tell me why she loved her so much. As a kid, around 6, Jess was in an apartment with a few other little cousins when some guy broke in to kill her parents. They were cooking crack at the time. Her 10-year-old cousin shoos all of the kids into a closet and tells them to keep quiet. Jess's best friend, the same age as her, hears screaming and runs out. She's also shot dead. The oldest kid wasn't able to stop her. Long story short, this aunt who had just been sentenced to death took her and all of the other kids in, kind of raised them on and off, and always made sure they were taken care of. They all lived in the same apartment complex. Those of us who aren't raised in such poverty and violence have no idea how bad kids in this country fucking have it. Number 2. 2 months after my brother and his wife bought a new house, they had to go out of town and needed their cats fed. Their house and my office are both a good drive from my apartment, but only a few minutes from each other. My brother said if I wanted, I could just stay over in the guest room rather than driving among the 3 places. So I got the keys and instructions and planned to stay there for 3 nights, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. Monday evening was uneventful until around midnight. I was lying on the living room couch watching Conan with a cat lying on my chest. I started to drift off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was standing in pitch black darkness. I completely freaked out. I had no idea where I was. I felt around in the dark and felt nothing. Finally, I realized there actually was a faint blue light coming from above. I moved towards it, and then understood where I was. I was in the fucking basement. The light was coming through the basement door at the top of the stairs, which leads into the kitchen. Just enough moonlight apparently made it through from a window elsewhere in the kitchen. I bolted up the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and closed the basement door. I was terrified until I calmed myself down enough to come to the conclusion you probably already came to. I had sleepwalked all the way down the stairs after opening the basement door, which I know was closed. A couple of things are important to this story. First, the basement. The house was very nice. Actually, more than they should have been able to afford. The only exception was the basement. I'd only seen the basement once when I'd first got the tour. It was totally unfinished, and was the one major thing they wanted to fix up. All they had down there were boxes and the washer-dryer. I had no reason to want to go down there, and had kind of forgotten it even existed. The other point is that sleepwalking is kind of a thing in my family, almost an inside joke. My brother talked in his sleep constantly, and would sleepwalk sometimes. it always scared the hell out of me. The idea of people doing things in their sleep just creeps me out to the core. Still does. My brother knew this and would tease me about it, so it was known in my family that I had this phobia. But as far as I know, I had never, ever sleepwalked until that night. The image kept playing in my mind over and over of me asleep, getting up from the couch, walking to the kitchen, opening up the basement door, and shuffling down the stairs in total darkness. Creepy as all hell. Anyway, I saw the TV was still on in the living room, playing The Wedding Crashers. I watched the rest of the movie, trying to laugh and think of the sleepwalking as a funny story to tell my brother. When I went upstairs to go to sleep in the guest room, I stayed asleep. That was night 1. The next morning, in the light of day, it didn't seem that scary. I texted my brother about it and joked around. All day, I wasn't bothered one bit, but as I'm walking out of my office to my car, I'm overcome by this sense of dread. All of a sudden, the thought of going to sleep in that house, and maybe sleepwalking again, is scaring the hell out of me. So I had a plan. I stop at the hardware store and pick up one of those rubber door stopper wedges. At the house, I jam this into the crack under the basement door and kick it until it's as far as it can go. I test it out, trying to open the door, and it won't budge. Perfect. Later, I go upstairs and fall asleep. When I wake up, I swear to God I think I'm dreaming. I was standing in darkness again, but this time I know exactly where I am. The smell is the same. The concrete floor under my feet is the same. I look around for the light from upstairs, and it takes me longer to find it because it's farther away. Last night I was only a couple of feet from the stairs. This night it was maybe 10 feet. I run up and turn on the kitchen lights. I see the rubber wedge on the floor, a couple of feet away, as if it was tossed there. Again, I can't stop picturing myself sleepwalking. Out of the bedroom, down the stairs, trying to open the basement door, bending down and yanking out the wedge, and then, again, slowly down into the darkness. I decided I was turning on the basement lights and they were staying on. I opened the door and flipped the switch to the basement stairway. I saw there was a main switch at the bottom of the stairs. To give you a quick sense of the layout, the staircase splits the basement into 2 parts. To the right is a small area with the washer-dryer, and to the left is the big open area. I walked down and turned on the lights for the whole basement. That's when I noticed something I hadn't when my brother gave me the tour. About 10 to 15 feet away, in the big area, there was a door to what looked like a small closet. This door was closed, but had no doorknob, just an empty hole, so it looked like it would freely swing open. I realized it was very close to where I had just awoken. Then a fucking freaky thought came to me. It was as if each night I was heading to the door and getting a little farther each time before I woke up. As soon as that thought popped into my head, I booked it up the stairs again, left the lights on, and closed the door. I went up to the bedroom, but it took me forever to fall asleep. That was night 2. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I woke up late for work. I didn't think about the basement at all because I was scrambling to get ready. At work though, I was still curious about what was behind the door, so I texted my brother and asked. He replied, "Wait, why were you in the basement?" I realized that when I texted him the day before, I never actually told him where I woke up, so I tell him I woke up in the basement, actually twice in a row. After a while, he sends this novel-length text. It was about how the basement is creepy, and not to go down there, etc. How they tried putting the litter boxes in the basement, and the cats made a mess in the house because they refused to go down there. How he volunteers to do every chore other than the laundry, just so he doesn't have to go down there. He says all this stuff, and it's surprising to me, because my brother never believed in the paranormal or superstitions, not even when we were kids. I also realize he never answered my question about the door, but I let it go. After work, I get the same feeling of dread as I'm walking to my car. I really don't want to stay there again, and I decide, fuck it, I don't have to. So I go and feed the cats, get my stuff, and drive back to my place. I'm supposed to feed the cats one more time, so I'll stop over in the morning. As I went to sleep at my apartment, I was thinking of all the steps I'd have to take to sleepwalk to the basement again. Find my car parked around the block, drive asleep to my brother's house, etc. But this time I sleep through the night. That was night 3. Thursday morning, I stop at the house as planned. I'm about to leave when I remember that the basement lights are still on. I don't even hesitate to go down there and turn them off. There was something about being there in the morning that, at the time, made it seem fine. When I go down, again, that door without a doorknob catches my eye, and it doesn't even seem scary anymore. So, what the hell, let's see. I walk over to it, and I distinctly remember not feeling spooked at all. That is, until I reach my hand towards the doorknob hole to pull it open. As soon as I do that, and I mean instantly, I feel this electric feeling, like the air before a storm, and I imagine a hand coming through the hole and grabbing mine. It was like 0 to 60, going from no fear to being certain something horrible would happen if I opened the door. It's hard to describe it other than that electric feeling. I booked it up the stairs and out of the house. So, a month later, I meet my brother for happy hour. A few drinks in, we start joking about me sleepwalking and the creepy basement. I say he never answered me about what was behind the door, and he says I don't want to know, joking at first, but then, as I persist, he gets more serious, insisting that I really don't want to know. Finally, he tells me, and I don't believe him. He's my big brother, and he's only bullshitted me 1,000,000 times in the past. This was his explanation. The previous and first owners of the house had a teen daughter that used the basement as her bedroom. The door was to her closet, where one night she curled up, took some pills, and killed herself. The family was going to remodel the basement, but after tearing it apart, realized they couldn't do it and had to move. That was why only the basement was unfinished, and why my brother was able to afford the place. The seller had to disclose a suicide happened in the residence. He said if I didn't believe him, to look up the market values of the identical houses in his tract. I know how much they paid for their house, and it was way lower. He and his wife considered themselves rational people, and figured it was a bargain, but they still didn't want to tell anyone. After they moved in, his wife was fine with the basement, but he grew to hate it. He apologized for not saying anything to me before I stayed there, but he never thought I'd have any reason to go down there. Now, here's what convinced me. I said, okay, the only thing that makes me kind of believe you is that last morning I was there, and I went over to the closet door. At this point, I see my brother's face change. I continued. When I went over to it, the air felt like, and at that same instant, I say, electricity, and my brother says, electric, at the same exact time. I saw his face and knew he was telling the truth. I've never stepped foot again in that basement, and I haven't sleepwalked since. Number 3. I was at a party at my friend Brian's house. I was really uncomfortable because I didn't really know anyone there, and I knew that all of Brian's friends were really into drugs. I wound up just watching movies and drinking mixed drinks until I fell asleep in a chair. The next morning, I was getting a glass of water and getting ready to leave when one of Brian's friends approached me. He asked me if Brian and I had hooked up during the night because he had heard so much noise coming from his bedroom. I said no, and he continued to tease me about it. He was being creepy and insulting, so I left. Later that morning, I found out that Brian had overdosed and died during the night. His friend had heard Brian moaning and thrashing around and thought that he was having sex. Number 4. So about 3 years ago during summer, I had a habit of staying up late playing games with my window open. This usually wasn't a problem since my neighborhood was quiet. However, one night someone knocked on my window around midnight. When I went over to investigate, I heard someone calling out for help in Spanish. My family was up, and I assumed it was one of our neighbors, so I went outside. Once I saw the person, I immediately knew something was off. Firstly, this wasn't one of my neighbors, and secondly, the person's clothes were ripped and they didn't have shoes on. Turns out the person was a she. I thought it was a young boy at first, and she only spoke Spanish. I tried communicating with my basic Spanish skills to no avail. Eventually, I went inside to ask my parents for help. We ended up calling my uncle, who was fluent in Spanish. He helped translate and told us that she said she was being human trafficked from Honduras and that she needed help. She wanted either $500 or a car to LA. We couldn't give either and offered to call the police, but she seemed adamant that the police didn't get involved. After this bombshell, my family went inside and decided to just call the police anyway. After making this decision, we wanted to check up on her at least, but as my mum and I were walking outside, we saw a car with no headlights pull onto our street. We immediately noped back inside. Once we felt like the coast was clear, we went back out, and the lady was gone. We called the cops and filed a report, but we never heard anything more. To this day, I don't know if this was some sort of scam, or if the girl really didn't know that the cops would help her, and that she didn't know where else to turn. Number 5. I had a neighbor who was a corrections officer at a juvenile prison in my city. There was a new kid at the prison one day. He was apparently very shy and very quiet. He had the misfortune of sharing a cell with one of the most violent inmates. His second night there, his cellmate unscrewed a screw from a bench and sat on his bed in the middle of the night. When he woke up, he said, "I'm gonna make you a pirate," and shoved the screw into the new kid's eye. My neighbor was the first corrections officer to respond to the kid's calls for help. When asked why he shoved the screw into the kid's eye, he claimed that he looked at him in the wrong way. That's a pretty fucked up situation if you ask me, and not one I'd like to deal with under any circumstances. Number 6. When my brother and I were around 4 or 5, we lived in a house that was about 100 years old. One day, we were walking up the stairs when we saw a tall man in a black coat and a top hat walk into the living room, which was to the left of the bottom of the stairs. A little freaked out, we thought our dad was pranking us, so called out for him. Shit. Both parents came out from the kitchen, on the opposite side of the stairs and isolated from the living room. I hadn't thought about it for a long time, and we never spoke about it. Then, about a month ago, my daughter asked if I believed in ghosts, so I told her this story. Literally seconds later, my phone bleeps. It was my brother saying, "I was just talking to my partner about paranormal shit. Do you remember the guy in the top hat?" Number 7. My friend was visiting family in the States. They lived in a rural community in Maine, and one morning she woke up before everyone else and decided to go for a run. After around 30 minutes, she turned back and started noticing a van following a few blocks behind her. She thought it was strange, so she started turning down a few streets, with the van following every move. She started sprinting, and the van sped up too. She ran to the first house she could find and started banging on the door. No answer. She hopped the fence and started banging on the back door. The dog in the house started barking at her, but still no one answered. She jumped into the empty pool in the backyard and hid while dialing 911. She could hear that the van had parked in front of the house, and a man started calling out to her, offering her a ride home. The dog in the house was now barking like crazy, and the man left after about a minute. Police showed up and took her back to her family's place. She gave a report, and they identified the van from a nearby HVAC business. It had been stolen earlier that day, and the same man was arrested in the next county at a gas station. Number 8. This happened to my father. I'll tell the story the way he told me. I was 22 years old. I had just gotten a place closer to my new job, but the neighborhood I lived in was secluded. Maybe 4 houses within a mile. Nothing for miles after that. I was having a normal night, maybe my first week there. I watched some TV and fell asleep. When I woke up around 1 a.m., I was about to go to my bedroom when I remembered to turn off the bathroom light at the opposite end of the house. As I was walking through the living room, I could barely see through to the kitchen, and even farther, the dining room. It was pitch black because the bathroom door was closed. In the dining room, however, I saw something tall standing up in the corner. I froze, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw it was an old man or woman in a white gown with white hair. "Hey," I yelled. The old person sprinted towards me like a fucking jet. I sprinted back to my room where the light was on. I put my hands up, ready to fight, and the old person came lunging in, and when they saw me, they stopped and said, "Why are you in my house?" I pretended I was leaving, and apologized while I eased into the closer bathroom, locking the door behind me and calling 911 with the house phone. Turns out, a woman about half a mile away in the neighborhood had a form of dementia and wandered into my house while I was sleeping. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you for everyone who's helped me reach 1 million subscribers. 1 million? Half a million. Fuck. Getting ahead of myself. Maybe one day we'll get that far, we'll see. But either way, that's crazy. I never thought I'd make it this far, so thank you to everyone in the Lazy Legion again. If you couldn't tell, I've got a bit of a cold coming on or something. I always seem to be getting sick nowadays. But yeah, that's why my voice is a little messed up. If you're into horror short films, then you might want to check this one out. It's called Blind Date. It was made by a friend of Gloomy House's, actually, and I know from personal experience how hard it can be to find an audience for an indie film. So go check it out if you have a free 30 minutes. Let him know what you think about it. I'd really appreciate it, so would he. And links can be found in the description below. As for my content, I have a few ideas lined up, so keep checking back because they'll be coming very soon. Until then, Lazy Legion, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.